Good to go? Okay, now we'll call the meeting to order. I participated in a conference call or video conference the other day on running online meetings. There's just a few things that I'll we need to talk about really quick. Turn off or mute your phone to minimize distractions. Voting, how would everybody like to do it? I thought I'd be able to see everybody, but I can't see everybody. So the way we did it last time, actually calling everybody by name, is that going to work for everybody? Okay, no responses. I think that's what we'll do. I'll just call when we have to vote. We'll call everybody out by name. When we go in camera, councillors need to be in a private space. And headsets or earbuds are acceptable for confidentiality. After the meeting is over, if we just had a quick debrief on what went well and how we can improve the process. And then after, if there's any problems during the meeting, just text me or whatever, let me know what the problem is, and we'll try and correct it on our end. So, agenda. Any changes or additions to the agenda?
Meryl, I had just wondered if you were going to add that Highway 3 letter that you sent. That's Tamara.
Okay, I sent that yesterday, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Let's put that. You got that letter, didn't you, Arlos?
I did.
Where would you put it in the agenda? Just under the...
You could put it under... Just one sec here. Do you think there's a desire to take action on it?
Yeah.
Because you could easily just put it under non-bylaw RFD, even though there is no bylaw. But
Okay, so 9.9. Okay, we'll put that as 9.9 Highway 3 letter. Anything else anybody'd like to add into the agenda? If not, we'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So Murray, I'll approve the agenda.
Okay, everybody in favor? Let me think here. Levitt's not online. Brian's not online. John?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Meryl in favor.
Brian's in favor.
Oh, he's there now. Good. Okay, agendas have been approved. Protocol items. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say under the protocol item? Announcements, recognition. And Levitt sent me a text and said he'll try and join the meeting in about 10 minutes.
I did a shared note for you if you could have a look, Paris.
Yeah, just hang on a sec. Sorry, I don't have that up in front of me. Yes, we can certainly do that. Okay. Yes, last weekend we got the notice that Craig Pittman is put in his resignation. He's moving to a different municipality, and we'd certainly like to acknowledge Craig for his contribution to the MD, all that he's done. And I know he's going to be here for a few weeks yet, but Craig, we appreciate all that you've done for the MD and wish you the best in your new adventure in a different municipality. Confirmation of minutes, November 24th, or March 24th, I should say, sorry. Any corrections or amendments?
I can make a motion to move those minutes.
Okay, all in favor? Brian?
In favor.
John?
In favor.
Tamara? Jennifer?
I am in favor, but I can read Tamara's lips. She's muted, so she said she's in favor.
Okay. Murray?
In favor?
Okay, carried. Thank you. Public engagement process. Is there anybody online that would like to say anything before we move on in the agenda? Hearing none, okay. It sounds like Sergeant Yetman might not be available for a little while, so we'll move on.
He's here.
Hello?
Oh, he's there. Okay. Somebody suggested you might be off at an accident. Okay, we'll go right to your report then.
Awesome. Okay, bear with me. This is the first time I've ever used Zoom, so I don't even know if you're seeing video for me at all. Can everybody hear me okay?
Here in the office, we can hear you.
Awesome. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Kind of strange circumstances for our meeting this morning, but I guess we'll plod on through it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the statistics, March 2020 compared to March 2019. And as I go through them, if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. So we'll get right into it. Impaired driving, 24-hour, 30-day suspensions. We had 6 last year in March, 0 this year. Assaults, last year we had 3, this year we had 3. Break and enters, last year we had 2, this year in March we had 3. Thefts are up. We had 7 last year, we had 12 this year. Threats, 0 last year, 1 this year. Mischief, 0 last year, 4 this year. Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, we had 2 last year, 1 this year. Other criminal code, other statutes, we had 29 last year, 29 this year. The assistance to police, other agencies, general public. Last year we had 13, this year we had 5. 911 hang-ups, we had 28 last year in March, we had 30 this year. So to use a popular term, it looks like we're flattening the curve for 911 calls. False alarms, we had 2 last year, 1 this year. Abandoned vehicles, 2 last year, 4 this year. Animal calls, down, we had 7 last year in March and 3 this year. Suspicious vehicles, persons, we had 8 last year, 4 this year. Lost and found property, 1 last year, 1 this year. Firearms Act, we had 3 last March, we had 2 this March. Check stops, 1 last year, 1 this year. Traffic complaints, last year we had 47, this year we have 30. Traffic collisions, last year there were 19, this year 12. Bylaw complaints, we had 1 last year, 1 this year. And admin files, last year we had 9, this year we had 0. So total calls for last March 2019 were 190. March of 2020 were 147. Are there any questions on that?
Anybody have any questions that they'd like answered on any of those statistics? If not, you can proceed.
Okay. I'll move on. I'll move on to the traffic-related stats here. So we had to rejig our stats a little bit. I went through this morning before the meeting and found that we had a bit of a problem with the stats. So I don't know if you guys received the updated report. Our support staff services are a little bit, they've changed a bit. We only have 1 support staff in the office right now, 1 working from home. So the total number you would have gotten for March of 2019 was 156. That number should be 74. So I'll just go down through the list. So for speeding, last year we had 28 in March. This year we had 5. Intersections, 4 last year, 1 this year. You'll notice these are a big difference, I think, or maybe you have received the. No, so you still have the old one there. So the corrected numbers, they're moving 12 last year, 2 this year. Seatbelts 11 last year, 0 this year. Non-moving 26 last year, 8 this year, and other provincial acts and statutes. We had 5 last year, 1 this year, for a total of 74. 74 last year and 17 this year. Any questions on that?
Oops.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, for collisions, now this is something I'll have to check into as well, because I just gave the number of 12 collisions for March of 2020, and the number that I have here in front of me is 31. So I will have to look into that, and I can get back to council. I can go through, maybe I can update Arlos by email if that works. But the number I'm seeing right now is 31, and I suspect that could be the more accurate number. Actually, maybe not. Sorry. This number might be a bit high. So I can look into that, and I can certainly update council on that number. My apologies if this number is out. But it's showing 31 reportable collisions as compared to 19 from last year. Like I said, I will confirm that, and I can send the CAO an email if that works. Park patrols, MDA Tabor Park 3, Enchant Park 4, the Forks 5, Grassy Lake Park 4, and other parks 2. So for a total of 18 park patrols. Are there any questions as far as those stats go?
Okay, any questions, anybody? Have you been involved at all in breaking up large gatherings, or has that been made aware? Are you aware of any large gatherings that need to be broken up?
We're actually not getting a lot of calls, to be honest with you. Now, that being said, I mean, I don't know how many calls AHS is actually fielding, because the process is that AHS gets it and then they bump it down to the either the police service of jurisdiction or down to, I believe, the CPOs in some cases. So as far as the RCMP goes, we have not been engaged in breaking up large gatherings. We conducted that enforcement operation out at the Forks a couple of weeks or so ago, I believe. But we're not getting a lot of phone calls in regards to the mass gatherings or anything like that. And our members are out on patrol too, and they try and keep their ear to the ground. So if there is anything going on, there's a fairly good chance we would hear about it.
Okay. Any other questions for Sergeant Yetman on his report for the month of March?
I got one, Merrill.
Okay.
Sergeant, I was down at the Forks on Sunday, and you'll be glad to know that Fish and Game is also helping you out because they stopped me. But are you having any more issues there with the roadblocks coming up or off, or when do you think areas like that could be opened again?
Well, I mean, I guess that would pretty much be up to the municipality or not as to when those roadblocks can come up. I mean, certainly given the social distancing guidelines that are being pushed down from the federal government and whatnot, that would have to be a judgment call, I would imagine. So you're just saying, you're just talking about maybe open it up to vehicle and some light foot traffic? Or?
No, actually, I was more talking about the roadblocks and where we have the blockades up there, because they seem to be just going around them. I'm not sure what else we could be doing there in order to help you out.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm not too sure. If you put up roadblocks, especially if they're just those portable barricades, there's absolutely nothing stopping people from going around them, right? I would hope that if something was going on down in the Forks, we would get a call about it. But I have no guarantees. We haven't had any nobody has called in recently saying that there were gatherings or whatnot going on down there. I'm not sure if my members were down there on the weekend or not. I would hope that they would have made a patrol through there, but that's something I could definitely check on as well.
I guess in reality, we're doing the due diligence by putting the signs up there. If they disobey it, I'm not sure there's a lot we can do about it.
Absolutely. The fact that you have the barricades up there, that's really all we can do at this point. It's unfortunately one of those things where we can't be everywhere all the time. I would hope that the majority of the people out there would heed the warnings on the barricades, road closed, not to go in there. But at the end of the day, we'd be foolish to think people aren't sneaking around them and driving in there. But we can certainly, if we're not doing a lot of patrols down there right now, maybe we can certainly pick that up as well.
No, like I say, you seem to be getting help from Fish and Game and others, so that's a positive sign.
Well, that's good. We haven't seen too many Fish and Game officers out here recently, but if they were down there, that's awesome.
Okay, anybody else have any questions for Sergeant Getman? Okay, thank you very much. Kirk, we'll turn it to you.
Thank you. I'm going to have to leave the
Okay, thank you very much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Good day, everybody. Thank you.
Morning, Council. Before you is the Regional Enforcement Services March 2020 report. As you can tell, things got a little bit busier as we expected that they would with the warmer weather approaching. The month of March had 106 calls. We hit 333 patrol routes. Now that's an increase of the last few months, and that has a lot to do with the fact that I was out a lot more often as a sergeant, doing some increased patrols in some of our COVID-19 areas. We only issued 6 violation tickets this month. A lot of that has to do with COVID-19 and making sure we pick the ones that are the most pressing. We did provide 19 warnings. Most of those came from Grassy Lake during a joint force operations in regards to making sure people weren't in our park. To touch on Councillor Bruin's comment this morning, on Sunday I was at the Grassy Lake Park and I spoke to Fish and Wildlife. We did a patrol of the area. There are people going around those barricades, but for the most part, I think they've gotten the message, and having that presence around there from both our regional partners such as Fish and Wildlife and ourselves and the RCMP, I think people are aware that's a hot spot and they tend to be going somewhere else. Notable calls for service, we had a few of them. We did assist Fish and Wildlife with the destruction of an animal that was hit. Unfortunately, had to be euthanized. We worked with Taber Police to have that done, and then Volker 7 came in and removed the animal. We did have an MD employee report a fraud or a scam to us via email. We made sure to pass that information on to the police force of jurisdiction, which is Taber Police, as it sits in Taber, as it sits in the MD office. And we made sure we sent the appropriate emails out to everyone to make sure that they were aware of the scam and they didn't give any information away. Like I said, we did participate in some joint force operations with the RCMP. A lot of that, it was emphasis strictly on COVID-19. A lot of education, not much enforcement, not yet, but we're certainly in that area right now. And CPO Peters was in actually Grassy Lake when a vehicle passed a stopped school bus, and Henry Peters managed to stop him, and the appropriate fine was given. This is something that we've heard a lot from First Student, the bus company, that in the MD, people just don't seem to stop at the stop signs for school buses. So we've made a very good program working with First Student to crack down on that. Public education activities for the month of March, March being Occupant Restraint Month, we focused our education largely on seatbelts and, of course, child seat restraints. All three of our guys are qualified child seat inspections, and had COVID-19 not been going on, we probably would have done a joint operation with some of our local fire departments in order to do the Walmart parking lot car seat inspections that we had done in the past so successfully. We do have some good news. We managed to move into the new CPO station. We're 12 days ahead of schedule. A lot of that has to do with Director Craig Pittman. Craig did fantastic work making sure that that project was ahead of itself. So although we have Dana on light duties and with COVID-19, the guys did manage to get that information or that equipment over into the new office building. And we also thank Stu Weber there for letting us as guys in trailer. I still sit on the COVID-19 preparation committee. That's the federal government one. I've been on that committee since January 2020. We did post our support for International Women's Day, which was March the 8th. It was a very successful social media post. Peace officers continue to participate with CP Rail. Again, we had some joint activities planned for the spring, which are canceled, but we're really working hard on Operation Lifesaver, which is something we plan to roll out in the schools. Roll ban information was disseminated, and we did do a good education and enforcement on the 1st of April. That information has gone out to truckers, and I think we have a lot more compliance. CPO Peters did have a really neat program idea set up for helping check vehicles. However, COVID-19 slowed that down. Our social media insights are grew in the month of February and March. We did receive a lot of posts and some feedback, which is positive for us. Fire response, we're down to 0. We didn't have any calls for peace officers during working hours. Although CPO Peters was first on scene in a motor vehicle collision, Butler was, on Walmart, and CPO Peters did take a burning permit complaint. I've been asked by the Indigenous Fire Marshal's Office, which is a federal body dedicated to the fire safety of Aboriginal communities, to join their program. Spending most of my time in the RCMP dealing with Aboriginal communities, a lot of prevention and education needs to be put out there, and I have no issues helping them with that to make any of our communities safer. Community event and patrols, Mr. Butler did attend that Lions dinner at the request of council. We're still working with Lost Paws. I'm hoping to have an RFD today for the Regional Animal Control Facility. Of course, it's hard to get quotes for stuff during COVID-19, but I think the society's done a good job. Of course, we promoted our St. Patrick's Day activities, mostly stressing the isolation component. Unfortunately, school is canceled for until September 2020 anyways, and that's a big program that Dana has involved a lot with the schools. We did produce a virtual tour of our CPO trucks. It was well received and it was well shared, so that's a positive thing. We're pretty happy to see that. And we did identify a 911 issue. We had some issues with TELUS over the last couple of weeks where we just couldn't dial 911 in the MD. Working with Chief Abella and, of course, Dana Bell at TPS, we managed to rectify that pretty quickly. You might have saw some Alberta Emergency Management alerts go out in regards to that 911. So that was something that we identified and helped to work with. Interagency meetings were extensive this month. I'm not going to go through all of them. Suffice to say that there isn't a regional partner that we haven't touched base with in the last month. A lot of it has to do with COVID-19, ensuring that our community peace officer partners have the proper equipment and training. We have given away some of our PPE. Some communities, some of our peace officers had nothing. We're very fortunate in the MD. We've done a very good job preparing for this. We had a lot of different respirators and options available to us. And anything that we had extra, we made sure that if they needed it, we gave it back. We gave it to them so they would have it. Training, of course, was canceled, but CPO Peters did manage to do a standard first aid course just before it got canceled. So bylaw investigations were up this month. We had 18. It's just that time of the year. major issue was compliance checks. I suspect we'll have a lot more of those with COVID-19, just because people will be at home, so we have a chance of picking off a lot more of these compliance issues. We didn't seize any dogs this month, which is good. Patrols increased to 24. A lot of that had to do with the weather warnings that were issued earlier in the month, and our guys have step up patrols when those reports come in for vehicles. Under the volunteer activities, I've had a search and rescue award named after me. As long as they don't call it the Kirk Hughes Memorial Award, I'm in pretty good shape. So I was pretty excited to hear that I've been nominated, or a award has been given out in my name. So I'm pretty happy about that. Rural Crime Watch has been busy. We did speak with Kevin O'Grady, the president there. We do have some signs that have arrived in the MD office, and we're still working out the logistics about how to deliver those signs. But my guys are on patrol routes anyway, so we're hoping we can help out with Rural Crime Watch. Emergency management, we've been very busy. Obviously, with COVID-19 calls, we've had a spike. We have assisted with the dissemination of some of that material and education. And as I am the alternate Dem, one of them anyways, I've been participating in the Emergency Operations Center meetings, and we do have some certain powers that were granted to us temporarily under the Public Health Act. Under upgrading events, I just put down COVID-19. Right now, that's the focus that we're working on, that and road bans, of course. However, we're definitely seeing a spike in COVID-19 related calls, not only from our community partners at Public Health, but just simply the increased number of patrols in our recreational areas, and just trying to kind of bring some calm to a lot of those different communities simply by just showing up and having a chance to show the flag and touch base with some of our shut-in residents. That's a program that we've been doing since the very beginning of this program, talking to a lot of the widowers and some of the people who are alone or most vulnerable in our community to make sure that they're still safe. Actually, I think Butler's going out today to speak to someone in Enchant. Just we haven't touched base with her in the last couple of weeks, and we really want to touch base with her. So that's the report for the Community Peace Officer program here for the month of March, subject to any questions from council.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Kirk other than you've been involved in any disbursements of large gatherings?
Mostly the beginning of the order itself, we actually teamed up with the RCMP and went to Grassy Lake and a few different recreational areas. For the most part, it's patrolling. The MD Park's now closed, so the CPOs have been doing some foot patrols in the area, talking to some people, making sure that the message is out there. CPO Peter's obviously in hot demand with his Mennonite skills, able to get that information out to people who maybe don't understand the wording properly. So other than a few calls from Public Health to actually check on people to ensure they actually are following the COVID-19 orders, as far as gatherings are concerned, like I said on Sunday, we didn't have much activity from what I could see as well. I was on patrol. So I'm hoping the message has gotten out there.
Okay, anybody else have any questions?
Merrill?
Yep.
Kirk, first of all, congratulations on your award.
Thank you.
Appreciate all the work you put into that. Kirk, my question is, the province has announced some changes to weight restrictions. How is that going to affect us?
That's a good question, Councillor. Thank you. And myself and CPO Peters actually sat in the meeting on Thursday to basically hear the Solicitor General's and the government's change on some of those roll bans as it rolls out. As I'm sure you're aware, a lot of it has to do with allowing trucks to park in places that we normally wouldn't let them park in. A lot of it has to do with extended hours and in some overweight loads. We haven't heard anything officially yet, and I think that's what we're expecting to see today. But from there, we will pass it through the CAO to determine our enforcement strategy going forward. A lot of the people that we've spoken to have been pretty good about following the rules, and I think it's a matter of determining what the government's priorities are and ensuring that those priorities match those of the MD of Taber, and then work out together with the CAO an education and enforcement strategy.
They're talking about essential services being exempt. I guess the question is, what is essential services? Some of the concern is in central Alberta, a lot of their crops haven't got off from last fall, so they're trying to seed and harvest at the same time. Have you got a definition of that yet?
We don't. I don't think the government has one either for essential services. However, the information passed down to my peace officers has always been, and will always continue to be, is that common sense approach. We are in some unprecedented times, and what we don't need is any more economic impacts that we're currently already seeing in our MD going forward. So we will make sure that as long as the vehicle itself is safe and should be driven on the road, and things aren't grossly overweight to the point where they're actually damaging our infrastructure, a lot of the information from the provincial government will probably allow those essential services. I would say farmers and seeders are number one on that list, next to our emergency services themselves, to continue and get into operations in regards to removing the dead crop and putting in the new crop as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
I guess there lies the question, though, if somebody chooses to go 100% using the provincial guidelines and ruin one of our roads, who's left on the hook for that road?
That's a very good question, Councillor. And I think once the province passes down some more information and some more solid direction coming, hopefully today, we'll be able to have that information for you. Currently, as it stands, our road bans are put in place, as all you're aware, to protect our infrastructure. The government's going to allow that to occur in violation of our municipal bylaw, and we have to determine who's responsible for that destruction. That being said, I'm hoping that information comes out today, if not, hopefully sometime early this week.
Any other questions for Kirk on his report? Okay, thank you very much, Kirk.
Thank you, Council.
Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, and with that, we'll turn the time over to Derek for the review of the audited financial statements.
Excellent. Hopefully, let's see. Is that, will that work? Okay, good. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to meet with you guys and go over the audit. Whenever an auditor gets together with those charged with governance, so in your guys' case with council, we're required to go over certain things based on our standards. So what I will do is first talk through those, and then I'll take us into the financial statements and make a few comments on those. The first item that we're required to go over is to just reaffirm our independence. So we do take steps to ensure that KPMG, myself, and everybody that was on the audit team was independent of the MD. So we make sure nobody's related to anybody in a decision-making capacity or involved in any business relationships and those types of items. Next item we're just required to go over is just the status of the audit. So where we are, of course, is that we've completed our audit work.
Derek, can I interrupt you for a second?
Certainly.
Can you speak closer to the mic? You got a little bit quieter, or I'm guessing, are you in the room with the mic or no?
I am. Hopefully that'll be a little bit better. Sorry, I mumble a little bit, or at least that's what my wife tells me. So
Nope, that's much better already.
Wonderful. So just with regards to the status of the audit, obviously we've completed our field work. We're very fortunate to get most of the work finished before the kind of lockdown, so to speak, started happening with regards to the COVID. And we're prepared to issue an unmodified or clean audit opinion subject to our discussions today and approval of the financial statements by council. Some of the other items that we're required to just talk about is with regards to the framework that the financial statements are prepared in accordance with. So consistent with prior years, the financial statements are prepared in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. There really hasn't been any changes in this standard per se this year. There was one new section that came out with regards to restructuring transactions. The MD didn't have any of those, so while there is a note indicating that you adopted that new standard, really had no impact on the financial statements. One thing I will note is that consistent with all the accounting standards in Canada, the framework is ever evolving. So when we get into your financial statements, you will note that there is a fair amount of discussion on future accounting pronouncements. One that will probably likely have a bit more of an impact on the MD is there's one around asset retirement obligations. So that's something that's similar to the contaminated sites one that management had to work on a couple of years ago. There might be a little bit more work from management, and of course they're aware of it, and we've been in some discussions with them with regards to that section. It's still a couple of years out, but it is something that is coming. Other items that we're required to talk about would be the policies that management uses in preparing the financial statements. So what we're required to do is just look to see if they're applied consistently and appropriate and free of any bias. So we have no concerns with regards to that. If there were any, of course, we'd bring that to your attention. The next item that we're required to talk about is accounting estimates. So in preparing the financial statements, as with any framework, public sector accounting standards requires that management make certain estimates in preparing the financial statements. So we're required to just discuss what the key estimates are, and just how they impact your financial statements. So probably the most significant one is with regards to your tangible capital assets. So that is your infrastructure and hard assets that the MD owns and uses over multiple years. Management's required to estimate what the useful life of those assets are. And then those items are brought into expense or amortized into your statement of operations as an expense over time. As auditors, we're required to just look at those estimates, look at what your historical experience has been, what your peer group is doing, and those types of things. And we don't have any concerns with that estimate, but if we did, of course, we would bring that to your attention. Another significant estimate would be around when the MD receives funding with external stipulations. So that would be when we receive grant funding for certain projects and programs. One of the things you'll notice on your statement of financial position is you have a line item called deferred revenue. So when you guys receive grant funding that's for, let's say, Project X, until you've spent that money on Project X, even though you have the cash, you don't recognize the revenue. So there's just an estimate, if you will, in recognizing that you've met those stipulations. And probably the other area where there is some estimate is around the allowance for doubtful accounts, particularly in our taxes receivable. Over the last couple of years, obviously, the resource sector has taken a bit of a hit, and so there's been some allowances taken against some of the receivables with regards to that. Now, you guys are still tracking them in hopes of being able to recover some of that, but there has been some valuation allowance taken against those. We have no concerns with regards to the estimates that management made. As I'd mentioned earlier, if we had any concerns, we would bring those to your attention. Other items that are a little bit different in your statements this year. As I'd mentioned, there was a new standard that was adopted, but really had no impact on the financial statements. There is a note that we'll get to when we're going through the financial statements on subsequent events, and it just discusses the COVID pandemic that we're dealing with right now. Obviously, while it doesn't impact your financial statements as of December 31st, 2019, there's obviously going to be some impact on the MD going forward. So unfortunately, at this point in time, it's very hard to estimate how that's going to change things. So the next item we're required to go over is if we had identified any misstatements or audit differences during the course of our audit. Your management team is very proactive, so throughout the year, whenever they come across any accounting questions or issues, they tend to contact us then. So we do not have any unadjusted or adjusted audit differences to bring to your attention today. One nice thing about that is that since management is asking us throughout the year and adjusting their financial statements throughout the year, the internal reporting that you guys would get throughout the year would be very accurate. So there's nothing worse than if an auditor goes out and gives 20 or 30 adjusting entries at year end, and then the statements look quite a bit different than what council might be getting internally. But in this case, your statements would reflect what you see in your year-end statements very consistently. The last item that just would need to go over is if we had any management letter points or observations. While we don't have any significant observations with regards to your financial reporting, really the only comment that I have to make is just the MD's administration is relatively thin or small when we look at its operations. So as auditors, we always say, well, there's probably some segregation of duties concerns. Now, while you guys do implement as much segregation of duties as you can, so having people review things, make sure you have multiple signatures on things, you do run thin administratively. We can't have a fully fleshed out receiving department, a fully fleshed out procurement department, those types of things. So what that really means for the MD is that you as counselors and you charged with governance, just make sure that you're asking questions throughout the year, make sure you know what you're signing. Just take steps to ensure that you're aware of what you're approving and those types of items. So, other than that, there's no other significant issues that I need to bring to your attention before we get into the financial statements. But I think before I get in there, I'll just pause for a moment to see if there's any questions. That's one of the challenges with virtual meetings is you can't see if anybody's trying to raise their hand or interrupt you. So,
At this point in time, does anybody have any questions for Derek?
I would have one, Merrill.
Okay.
Derek, in the past, we've always approved our checks through council as kind of a check and balance. Now, we've had some recommendations that we don't need to do that. What is common practice? Like you say that we need to make sure that we are aware of what's going on. To me, being able to look through the council checks is one way of doing it. What do other organizations do? Do councils approve checks?
So, to be honest, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There is a trend of moving away from councils reviewing those checks, with the authority resting with senior management, and then just ensuring that the controls that are in place around them reviewing it. So in this case, it would be, if we look at Arlos, for example, if he's approving things, he shouldn't be able to change anything in the accounting system and those types of items. So as long as you have those types of controls in place, it's as effective. Usually when they look at it, so council is providing management with the approval to approve checks based on the budgets. And so when they're still getting while you guys are still getting your internal reporting regarding comparisons to budgets and those types of items, that usually serves as a good control around that. Now, that being said, some councils still are reviewing canceled checks. Some are still signing all of the checks. I think the signing of the checks is probably, we're starting to see less and less of that as councils are, this might sound wrong, as they're turning over new blood. But it really comes down to the comfort level of council. Ultimately, you have a fiduciary responsibility to the ratepayers, so it's up to you guys how you feel you're satisfying it. But there is a trend that we're seeing less and less of these things go to council, and they're taking more of a higher oversight role.
I guess one of the comments you made is we have a lean staff, which isn't a bad thing, but this is an additional way to put eyes on it, is it not?
It is. Yeah, no, that is fair. That is one way of doing it. However, the one way is you want to make sure that the control is effective. So one of the challenges a lot of times councils see when they're signing the checks is that they're not involved enough in the day-to-day operations to actually feel like they know whether or not they should be signing the check. So that's why some of it has been more moved over to, your CAO or something like that, where they're aware that the services or the goods were provided before they sign the check. So, but again, it is a bit of a mixed bag. So.
Okay. Well, I know, excuse me, I know we've talked about, or it's, been brought to our attention that fewer and fewer are doing it this way. Anybody else have any comments? It's something that's been done as long as I've been here, but, and our deputy Reeve is usually one that countersigns checks. Anybody else have any comments on that topic? Seeing none?
I think we have.
Go ahead, Tamara.
I think in the past we have, noted a few things that just for council clarification that we may not have seen otherwise. So to me, it does just give a bit of an insight onto what's happening. Even when we used to see the canceled checks, just for information, it did allow us to ensure we knew what was happening. And I mean, not so much determining what was paid for or not. I have confidence they're doing that accordingly, but it just gave us another insight as to what's going on in the MD.
I got one question. So how would it work then if we don't approve something, even though the check has been written and signed and given to the vendor?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what the question is. I apologize.
If we see the canceled checks, the register, don't
Like how can you go back on a check after it's been signed and approved and given to the vendor? Like, because we don't usually see the checks until after they've been given out, as I'm aware. So can you go back on a check that you've been given, and how would you go about doing that?
Well, if it had been cashed, no, the money would already be with the vendor. I guess the question then would be, you're relying more on a detective control, so that's when you would make your inquiries of management. So there's two types of internal controls. There's preventative and detective. Preventative controls are the ones where, you have two people signing the check before it goes out. So that's preventative control. A detective control would be reviewing it after the checks have gone out. Now, when you look at budget and making sure that you have as much segregation of duties as you can, the signing of the two signatures before the check goes out should act as an effective preventative control. Now, what we're suggesting is here that maybe something that's an approved expense has already been signed, but we're not happy with it. Well, that's not necessarily making it a wrong expense or an inappropriate expense, but it does allow you to make question of management as to, why did we incur this cost, those types of items. But yeah, there wouldn't be, if the check's been cashed, I mean, it's a case of then going back and talking to the vendor, but you wouldn't be able to undo the check.
Anybody else have a question for Derek on that topic? If not, we'll just move on then, Derek.
Okay. So I'll take us into the financial statements. First thing I'll draw everybody's attention to is the independent auditor's report. It's very consistent with what you would have seen in the prior years. It is an unmodified or clean audit report. It's a couple pages, so I won't necessarily read it. However, if you're self-isolated and bored, feel free to have a read through it today. What I'll bring everybody's attention to, though, is probably page 6 of the statements, which is our statement of financial position. So what this is essentially a snapshot of where the MD was at December 31st. Oh, sorry. I moved away there as I was getting into the financial statement in my notes. I apologize. So I'll take us to the statement of financial position. I'll go through the statements, but I'll likely just touch on kind of the highlights or items that would jump off the page if I was in your guys' chair. However, if there's any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. So first item on that page, of course, is our cash position. You see that it's a bit stronger than the prior year. There's a couple main reasons for this. One is just our operations. So when we get over to our statement of operations, we'll note that we do have a surplus this year. Also, one of the other items that we note is our deferred revenue is up a bit this year over the prior year. And again, I talked about deferred revenue earlier, so this is where we've received cash, but we haven't actually met the stipulations to recognize into revenue. However, it still does impact our cash balance. So overall, we do see that increase in cash. Moving down to our receivables, we have both our taxes and grants in lieu of receivables and our trade receivables. Overall, between the two of the numbers, we do see a bit of a decrease this year. And that's largely because in 2018, we had some receivables from the province with regards to the flood money. So that's going to be kind of an ongoing trend as we kind of work our way through the financial statements. So we'll see, including when we get down to our expenses, that we see a bit of a decrease there, just as we had a bit less, obviously, and that's good when we're dealing with flood issues. We had less expenses and less revenues attached to those items. Moving down through the rest of our financial assets, we see the numbers are relatively consistent with the prior year. Some minor fluctuations just due to activity from year to year, which overall then when we look at the first subtotal there, we see our financial assets have seen a bit of an increase. And again, that's largely because of the cash amount that I talked about earlier. Moving down to our liabilities, our accounts payable and accrued liabilities also saw quite a decrease over the prior year. And again, getting back to when we start looking at our flood expenditures and those types of items, we see a decrease there. Our deferred revenue, we do see a bit of an uptick there. I've already mentioned that that's a case of where we received cash, but we haven't met the stipulations to recognize it into revenue. Employee benefit obligations, we see a decrease there. One of the items when we get into our statement of operations, we'll talk about the fact that our payroll expenses are a bit lower this year because of some of the human resource management that we've done this year. So as we see numbers of employees go down, we also see employee benefit obligations go down as well. Long-term debt, we see a decrease there, and that's of course our regular scheduled payments occurring. Below that, we get to, there's a subtotal called our net financial assets. So we see an increase from the prior year. And so what this number represents is that if we were to take our financial assets and we subtract our liabilities, we're in a position where we would be able to pay off all of our obligations if we had to, and still have, just about our $17.6 million left. This is a strong sign. If we look at a lot of municipalities across Alberta, they actually find themselves in a net debt position. Particularly when we get into some of the urban municipalities, as they have to borrow a fair amount of money to renew infrastructure and those types of items. So it's nice to see actually a municipality strengthening up their financial asset position. Not something we're seeing right now quite a bit. After that, we get into our non-financial assets, and so these represent, of course, assets that are consumed in the day-to-day operations of the MD. Obviously, the largest number there being our tangible capital assets, which represents the book value of our infrastructure and those hard assets that we've invested in over the years to provide services to our stakeholders. Then we've got our inventory for consumption and prepaid expenses. Again, we see some minor fluctuations in those from year to year, just again due to the timing of when we do purchases and when we've consumed items. Overall, at the bottom, we have our accumulated surplus. So your accumulated surplus represents your residual ownership in all of your assets less your liabilities. And we've seen an increase this year, and of course that's due to the fact that we do have a surplus in our day-to-day operations. We take us to our next page, which is our statement of operations. What this page does is it tries to tell the story financially of what occurred in the MD throughout the year. So looking at our revenue items, overall we see a bit of a decrease in our revenue items, but we look at some of the individual items, we see some different stories there. One item, the very top one, our net municipal property taxes, we see an increase there. Of course, that's as a result of our changes in our mill rates. Then we do see some changes in our user fees and sales, so a bit of an increase there. Where we do see one of our decreases, which impacts our revenue overall, we see our government transfers for operating. So again, there we see quite a bit of a decrease there. Again, a lot of that happened to do with the flood funding that we incurred in 2018. We also saw a bit of a decrease in our rental income as well. Overall, though, when we look at our revenue, we see a change of about $600,000, which again, largely when we look at our government transfers, we see that change. Moving down to our expenses, similar to where we see a decrease in our revenue, we also see a decrease in our expenses. The two main drivers there would be, of course, the 2018 flood expenditures and some of the payroll managing that had been done. So keeping in mind that when we look at it, they kept kind of lockstep with each other, both the decrease in revenues and our expenses. And when we compare them to the budgets, this was obviously what was anticipated. So it speaks highly that your management team was able to perform what was anticipated within the budget. We come to after the expenses, we come to our excess or deficiency of revenues over expenditures. This year, we note that we do have a small excess compared to the prior year where we had a deficiency. So again, a very, very modest one when we look at our revenues and our expenses overall. Then we get into our other revenue, which is our government transfers for capital. So here we see quite a decrease from the prior year. And that's because last year we had a number of large MSI projects that were finished. So again, just due to sometimes the timing, especially when we look and see that we see an increase in our deferred revenue this year, sometimes that number just fluctuates with what projects are getting completed in the year. Overall, our excess of revenues over expenditures is a little over $1 million, which is very consistent with where we were last year. And so we do see that change in our accumulated surplus being the amount that I mentioned earlier.
Derek, I do have a question, and I know that in 2019 we had roughly $2.4 million in uncollected taxes between the oil and others. That's not a number that's ever taken into consideration here, like bad debts or whatever?
Well, you do have an allowance against them. So largely we took a large allowance, I believe it was in 2018, but it might have been in 2017. Brian, not sure if Brian's on here, if he can kind of assist me on that one. But if we look at note 4, I'm sorry to jump, I think it's note 4, which I would jump us ahead a number of pages to page 19 on the financial statements. There is a note that provides the allowance for the doubtful accounts against those amounts. So there's definitely a case where like you are netting them on those two previous statements, so they're not showing up gross on those two statements, but it is definitely something that's impacting the MD and its cash flows. That's for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Hopefully that helped. I apologize, can't quite give you when we did, when management had done a large assessment and looking at, okay, we have to really consider whether or not we're going to allow, collect on these, so we do have to set up some type of an allowance against them. That's unfortunately.
If you want, Derek, I can just add a little bit to that,
sure,
where
please
we
do.
ended up with our allowance for bad debts and the provision for allowances.
Yes, please do.
So on page 14 is the Schedule 5. It's expenses by object, and that's the best place to look at where the provision for allowances for uncollectible taxes ended up. So about middle of the grouping there, it says provision for allowances. We budgeted for $917,000 in uncollectible property taxes, and in 2019, we had a net of about just about $646,000. Now, what we did, what ended up happening there was we were able to recover about $750,000 of the prior year's uncollectible taxes, and we netted it out with this year's. So without that collection that we were able to do, we would have ended up more closer to about $1.4 million this year in 2019 in uncollectible taxes. So that's the breakdown of the net provision for the allowance or the uncollectible taxes in 2019. Now that $645,000 is included in the consolidated statement of operations under administration. But we had budgeted for $917,000 there.
Thank you for helping me out there, Brian. I didn't have the note for that, so I appreciate you handling that question. So the next page, if we can go back to page 8 of the financial statements, is just the statement of changes in net financial assets. As I'd mentioned before, the MD did experience an increase in its net financial assets. What this statement does is just takes your excess of revenues over expenditures, which is really the large driver, and shows why the financial asset position went up by more than $1 million. It essentially went up by $1.8 million. And really the main reason for that is that when we start changing our accounting for adjustments in non-cash expenditures, such as the amortization of capital assets, also the proceeds that we received on assets that we disposed of, less the acquisition of capital assets and changes in inventory. That's largely where we're seeing that additional increase in our net financial assets. Probably a bit of an easier page to follow, though, is the next page, which is the statement of cash flows. Whenever I'm going over a set of financial statements, this is when I like to spend a little bit of time on whether it's a for-profit, a not-for-profit, or a municipality. As what this statement does is it essentially takes your excess of revenues over expenditures for the year, and similar to the previous page, it tries to adjust it, or not tries, it adjusts it for your non-cash items, your expenditures that aren't expensed in the year, as well as changes in our liabilities and assets to really show what was the impact on our bank account at the end of the year. So the first item that I like to kind of focus on is the first subtotal this year, which is 6 million compared to 5.6 last year. And what this number represents is the cash flow from the day-to-day operations of the municipality. So when we look at it, again, the day-to-day operations generated a strong cash flow, very consistent with the prior year. Then when we go down to our next couple of pages, or next couple of totals and subtotals of this page, it shows where that cash was used. So while the day-to-day cash flow, our operations generated $6 million of cash, we turned around and invested $4.1 million in infrastructure and hard assets. So we see the acquisition of capital assets below that. Now that's partially offset by the funds that we received when we disposed of certain of our older capital assets. But again, looking at it, of the 6 million that came in, we used 3.3 net to reinvest in ourselves. Then we see a slight change in our investments, and then we also see our repayment of our long-term debt. So overall, of that $6 million that was generated from day-to-day operations, the municipality held on to essentially 2.4, which is why we see that increase in our cash position. Just one other comment on this page is whenever you're looking at financial statements, that first subtotal that I talked about, that on this page, the 6 million in the this year, whenever you're assessing an organization or looking at an organization, you want to see that number is positive year over year, or at least consistently generating a positive number. What that means is that our day-to-day operations are generating that cash flow to allow us to reinvest in ourselves. Often, a lot of times, if you see organizations have that number as a negative number, that means that eventually at some point in time they're going to have to dispose of assets or borrow assets to fund their operations. So again, it's good to see that number staying positive as a trend. And again, this statement just again helps to show users how we're using cash and those types of items. Starting on page 10, we get into some of the schedules to the capital assets. The first one is our schedule of accumulated surplus. Your accumulated surplus representing your residual ownership in your assets less your liabilities, as I'd mentioned earlier. And essentially that residual ownership is really broken into 3 buckets. There's your equity and capital assets, which represents your net book value.
Here, could we just have you stop for just a minute? We lost one of our counselors, so
certainly.
we're going to see if we can get him back online here real quick.
Certainly.
Oops.
I'm good, thank you.
Is he on? John, are you there?
Yes, I am. Dead battery. I had to plug my laptop in.
Okay, okay, no problem. Okay, we'll let Derek carry on.
Okay, sorry if I repeat myself a little bit here. So on page 10, we have the schedule of changes in accumulated surplus. Your accumulated surplus essentially representing the residual ownership the MD has in its assets less its liabilities. The accumulated surplus, though, is essentially broken into three buckets. One number representing the equity and tangible capital assets, or your ownership in your capital assets at their net book value, less any debt associated with them. Your restricted surplus, which represents your reserves, amounts that council has set aside for future operations and expenditures, and then the unrestricted surplus, which represents amounts that have accumulated over time that would be, in essence, available for the day-to-day operations. Page 11 takes us into the schedule of tangible capital assets. And this schedule essentially provides a breakdown of your infrastructure and your other assets. On your statement of financial position, the numbers shown net, so this just provides a breakdown of your cost and what you've acquired in the year, less dispositions, as well as that amortization that was taken in the year to come down to the net book value. Page 12 takes us to our schedule of property taxes. So what this schedule does is it shows your the gross levy less the requisitions to show the net municipal taxes that end up on your statement of operations. Page 13, Schedule 4, provides a breakdown of our government transfers. So it shows our operating amounts received from the province and other local governments, as well as our amounts received for capital. Page 14, Schedule 5, provides a breakdown of your expenses by object. So your statement of financial position shows them by function. This just shows them a different way of looking at your expenses. Some of the key items that we talked about already, of course, was that we saw decreases in our payroll, as well as decreases in our contracted and general services. So the main drivers there, of course, being the flood expenditures in 2018, which we didn't have in 2019, as well as the payroll item that I'd mentioned, and of course Brian had gone over the provision for allowances as well. Page 15, Schedule 6 is a schedule of segmented disclosures. So what this statement does is it takes your statement of operations, it essentially combines your statement of operations and the last schedule, showing a breakdown of the statement of financial position both by object and by function. So again, just a different way of looking at what's on the statement of financial position, or sorry, statement of financial operations. After that, we get into the notes to the financial statements. So the first couple of pages, from pages 16 to the top of page 18, just go through your significant accounting policies. I've already talked about those before in that we don't have any concerns around them, so I won't go through them again. They are very consistent with the prior year, as there have been no changes. Note 2, which is also on page 18 and to the top of page 19, go over future accounting pronouncements. So this was something I talked about a little bit earlier as well. The Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards is always changing, so this this note here just provides some information on some of those changes that will be occurring in the future. Starting on page 19, Note 3, we start getting into some of the notes that cover off providing a little bit more detail to some of the numbers on your statement of financial position and operations. So Note 3, of course, going over our cash and temporary investment breakdown. Largely, we see a change in there is just as a result of how we're holding cash versus holding liquid investments like treasury bills and GICs and those types of things. So we're holding more liquid assets right now. 4 goes to our taxes and grants in lieu of receivables. This was a note we kind of touched on earlier as well. It does show the gross amount of those receivables less the allowance for doubtful accounts, which we do note, of course, that it's very consistent with the prior year. Note 5 gives us a breakdown of what we were including in our long-term investments, so just some co-op equity, those types of things. Note 6 provides breakdown of what we have in our other financial assets. So again, it's just showing some under levies there that we're allowed to collect on in the future. Note 7 providing some information on our deferred revenue. As we noted before, we've received some cash regarding MSI that we haven't spent in the current year, so we see it as being deferred. Note 8 provides some information on employee benefit obligations, so we do see a bit of a decrease there regarding our vacation time owing. Note 9 provides information on some of the trust fund activity that we hold on behalf of others. Note 10 provides some information on contaminated sites. So this is a section that the MD was required to adopt a few years ago. We do not have anything booked at this point in time, as all of the sites would be considered active and there's no obligations attached to any inactive sites. Note 11 provides some information on long-term debt. So again, the financing that you have with the Alberta Finance Corporation, as well as information on scheduled repayments. Note 12 is some required disclosure under the MGA regarding our debt limits. Note 13, while there is already a schedule on the tangible capital asset that shows this information in a bit more detail, this just shows the net book value on a summarized basis. Note 14 and 15 shows a little bit more of a breakdown on the numbers that I talked about earlier on our accumulated surplus, including how the equity and tangible capital assets is determined. So again, that being your net book value of your capital assets, less long-term debt associated with it, and the accumulated surplus, as I mentioned before, being broken down between your equity and capital assets, your reserves, and your unrestricted surplus. Note 16 is some additional required disclosure under the Alberta regulations. It just requires that there be some disclosure on councillor salary and benefits, as well as designated individuals. Note 17, because we participate in the local authority's pension plan, there's some required disclosure around that, as well as 18 on the Apex supplementary plan. Note 19 just talks about the information on Schedule 6, that there's some additional information broken down there. Note 20 and 21, some required disclosure around contingencies. So nothing necessarily there that we would need to book, but we do just need to talk about those. And also with the contractual rights, that there are certain obligations that we receive as revenue from year to year. 22 goes over some obligations with regards to expenditures. 23, we're required to disclose receivables and payables with related parties. So when we look at Highway 3 Regional Water Service Commission and Vauxhall, because they are considered related parties, we have to provide some disclosure on those. Note 24, we're required to disclose if there's any significant interest or market risk. There isn't any, but just some required disclosure there. 25, the budget information that's presented is the one that was approved by Council back in December 11th, 2018. I mentioned before that we do have a new note this year on subsequent events, so just a little bit of a disclosure on COVID-19. 27, ultimately, these financial statements need to be approved before I issue my final audit opinion. And then 28, comparative information. Within the financial statements, management just changed the way they disclosed some of the numbers in Schedule 8 or Schedule 5. So the comparative number looks a little bit different if we compare it to the prior year. And that's largely just management wanted to disclose the amount of internal expenditures that they capitalized. And so while the bottom number is consistent with the prior year, if we were to compare Schedule 5 this year to last year, you'd note that the 2018 numbers are a little bit different, and that's why they're different. It's just that there was management wanted to disclose a little bit more information to you guys. So that is a 100-yard dash through your financial statements.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Derek on the financial statements as presented? Tamara had a list of questions. Do you want those answered by Derek, or Brian? Are you going to do those ones?
Thank you, Reeve. Brian said, Badura said he could answer them. Some have been answered by Derek, so thank you, Derek. and I completely accept the financial statements as presented. I just wanted to double check on page 7, the rental revenue, there's 147,000 difference. And I realized with a financial statement this extensive, that's kind of a petty little question, but I just was wondering what the difference was, just change in how many people wanted to rent stuff or change that we didn't have stuff available. So just curious on that.
If you'd like, I can go through each of the questions one by one. I can sort of read them off. I think I got them pretty clear. However, there might be one I need a little clarification on. So the first question with regards to page 7, the rental revenue is $147,000 different. So what it is the rental revenue in 2019 is about $147,000 less than it was in 2019. Pretty much all of our rental revenue comes from the lands and leases departments with the MD-owned lands. And when I looked at the details in the financial statements, we have a particular account called other revenue, and what that catches is if there's any new pipelines that are installed, any new wells that are drilled. We did have a few more pipeline installs and some wells that were drilled in 2018 that didn't happen in 2019, and that accounts for about $100,000 of the decrease in revenue from the rentals, as well as our oil leases. Rental revenue was down about $50,000 or $47,000 approximately. So all in all, that explains the $147,000 decrease. The reason for the rental decrease, I'm not certain if it's unpaid lease rentals from oil companies. Maybe Brian Pierce can mention anything if I'm wrong on that one, but I believe the $50,000 decrease in rentals is due to unpaid oil leases, and the $100,000 is for pipelines and some wells that were drilled in 2018 that didn't happen in 2019.
Sure. This is Brian here. I wouldn't say that the revenue is down from our oil leases. It's more of a lag in our applications for our surface right board applications. It's been taking upwards of a year to get those payments. So we are receiving them slowly, but they're not realized in the year that necessarily.
And on the next question, I may need a little clarification. The planning on page 7, planning development expenses, $250,000 increase. When I look at page 7, I don't quite see a $250,000 increase in expenditures.
Yes, and I think that one's okay. I think I just was, it should have been 100,000. I was looking at something else, so I apologize for that. I looked at the wrong line. So I think 100,000, we just changed our practices, I think, in planning and development. So I'm okay with that one.
And that's correct. And there is a couple items in the planning department that explain that difference. So in 2018, we were finishing up our intermunicipal development plans with some of our rural neighbors. We did receive a grant from the provincial government, and those costs, which were incurred to have a consultant prepare some plans for us, they accounted for approximately $100,000 to $130,000, which we didn't have that expenditure in 2019. And but to offset that change, we did have a new contract study. The MCCAC Renewal project was budgeted for in the planning department, mostly because they were preparing a plan for future development of solar projects on various sites as sort of a guideline for how this would happen throughout the province. And we had about $200,000 of expenditures there. So the net difference between not having the intermunicipal development project going, and the contract study for MCCAC is about $100,000 increase in expenditures in planning and development. The next question I'm reading on page 8, proceeds of tangible capital assets, 2.4 million difference. And again, on this question here, I'm looking on page 8 on proceeds of disposal of tangible capital assets. There is a slight difference, but it looks like our proceeds from capital disposal of assets was $737,000, and the prior year's $486,000.
I think the question was on the difference between the acquisition of tangible capital assets in 2018, it was 6.5, and in 2019, 4.1 million. I think that's the question.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying that. So the difference between the acquisition, we did have a budget of $9,928,000 for acquisition of tangible capital assets. The big part, we purchased all our physical assets, equipment, vehicles, and so forth. However, some projects that were budgeted or scheduled for 2019 didn't get underway or didn't get completed. So I believe there were about 3 or 4 projects that were being funded through either MSI or provincial grants of some sort that were carried forward to 2020 as they didn't get completed or advanced in 2019.
Okay, next question is on page 14.
Okay, there is a question, the gain loss on disposal of tangible capital assets, 176,000 difference. When we do budget for disposing of capital assets, so again, that we had a loss of $90,545 in 2019, and that's on page 8 again. That's if you want to, if we can go back to that page. On page 8, just to explain the gain or loss change on tangible capital assets on page 8 of the financial statement. Yeah, right there. So in 2019, we had a loss on disposal of $90,545. The prior year is a gain of $85,959. During various years, you'll have gains, losses on disposals, depending on the proceeds of the sale of the assets. I looked closely at the working paper I had on the loss on disposal or assets that were disposed. There were 2 pieces of equipment. They were about midway through their life cycle, and just regards to the amortization that had been expensed on them versus the proceeds, we did have a higher net book value of essentially about $150,000 on those 2 particular assets. Like I say, they were midway through their cycle, and they just happened to be the proceeds compared to their net book value generated the majority of that loss this year in tangible capital assets.
And that probably speaks to the question on page 11 too.
Yes, okay.
So I'm good with that. So if we just go on to number 14.
Okay, so a question with regards to page 14, grants to individuals and organizations is about $302,000 less than it was in 2018. The majority of our grants to individuals and organizations comes through recreation, some in the lands department. In 2018, we constructed an asset through grant funding that we more or less handed over to another level of government. So the specific project we did was our share of the traffic control devices at Highway number 3 and 864 near Johnson's Addition. And we had used, I believe, federal gas tax funds and paid a portion of that project. The project is on a provincial highway, and so essentially after we expended the funds, that asset became a part of that road infrastructure, which belongs to the provincial government, province of Alberta. And so we recorded that as a contribution to another government. And that came to about $321,000.
Those are the only questions I have on the financial statement.
Okay. Any other questions at all for Derek from anybody? My question, Derek, is going to be that I get asked every year about potential for fraud in the organization. Is there processes in place to? I mean, I think you talked about that. We're pretty thin. Is there processes in place that reduce the risk of fraud?
You do take steps as much as possible. Sorry, I'll get closer to the mic there. Obviously, you do have dual custody of assets as much as possible. You have dual signing authorities as much as possible. Probably the biggest risk that all organizations have is actually the external risks from phishing and various things like that. The only thing that I guess kind of the mother and apple pie comment that we try to make to everybody is making sure that organizations are taking steps to ensure that their employees can identify and know what looks real or what doesn't look real. Make sure that they're aware of the risks. I think people are becoming much more cognizant of things. They're not just clicking on links, and they're not worried about CRA coming to arrest them, those types of things. But obviously, that's probably the biggest risk that organizations are facing now. Even if we look back a couple of years ago where cash handling tended to be a bigger risk for organizations, you're seeing less and less cash being handled. I mean, you guys will still have people that'll come in and pay cash for things, but you're seeing less and less of that. So while there's always some risk, you guys have taken steps to mitigate it as much as possible. But like I said, the biggest risk right now lies with end users and those technology risks around phishing and things.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Derek. From council, we'll need a motion to approve the financial statements.
This is Tamara. I'll make that motion to approve 2019 audited financial statement.
Okay, all those in favor, we'll start with Levitt. If he's still here.
Yes, I approve.
Okay.
In favor.
Brian.
In favor.
John.
In favor.
Jennifer.
Yes.
Murray.
In favor.
And Merrill's in favor, so that's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Derek. Okay. Okay. Everybody hear me? Hopefully. I was just reminded we need two more motions. One to accept the RCMP report and one to accept the community peace officer report. So if I could get somebody to make a motion on either of those reports.
I'll give you a motion for the RCMP report.
Okay, and we'll do the same thing. Levitt,
In favor?
Brian,
In favor.
Tamara,
In favor?
Jennifer,
In favor.
Murray,
In favor?
Merrill, carried, and then one for the CPO report.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Levitt gives a motion. All in favor. Brian,
In favor.
John,
In favor.
Tamara,
In favor?
Jennifer,
In favor.
Murray,
In favor?
Merrill's in favor, carried. So we've got that done. We're good here? Okay, Candace gave me the thumbs up. We're good. So you need a signature? Okay, just give me a second, guys.
Meryl, I think you'll have to speak closer to the mic as well, please.
Okay. All right, we're down to the consented, declarations of conflict. Anybody have anything that they feel they have a conflict of interest in any of the remaining part of the agenda today?
I'd like to have the discussion in closed session.
Okay, will do. All right, consent. Thanks, Derek. Have a good day. Consent agenda. There anything you want to be brought out of the consent agenda for discussion later?
I was wondering if we could bring the Taborn District Housing out, just kind of a discussion as to how they're making out there.
Yes, that was my request as well.
Okay.
Just to give you an update.
So, Taborn District Housing.
It won't require a motion. So I remember last meeting we were sort of discussing, could you discuss it now? Because it's not so much a motion.
Okay. Candace just clarified that we can discuss it since there's no motion coming as a result of discussing it. So we'll turn it to Tamara to discuss Taborn District Housing.
So they have followed all of AHS protocols, so I won't go over those. You know what those are. Very challenging for the staff at Clearview Lodge and the all the properties that they look after, like Harmony Home and even the low-income housing. Different practices in place. The staff has been allocated. We've changed our budget to include what they're calling COVID or hazard pay, and that's just to ensure that staff are feeling they're being acknowledged and recognized for the risks that they're placed in. At this point, they haven't had any cases, and at one time they thought there were some, but they came back negative. So they're really implementing good practices. Again, just like everyone, we don't know how long it's going to go on for, but things that they've done is looked for technology to be improved. The Meals on Wheels in our community have been continued, but they did have all their volunteer groups drop off, so they have had individuals who are stepping up to deliver those Meals on Wheels, because for those people who receive them, that's one of the ways they're able to stay in their home. Yeah, I can't say enough about the staff at Taborn District Housing for what they've doing. They've taken their office staff to become part of the frontline staff at Clearview, even doing things like the receptionist who was at the office. Now she's assisting people with hand and hair care. And, you know, you might, for those of us who are just isolating at home, our hair and nails are what they are. But those are very important hygiene and safety things for staff. So they've adapted very well, and I'm very thankful for the work they're doing in our community. Brian, do you have other questions related to it?
No, that was basically it, Tamara. Meals on Wheels, I know they relied a lot on the seniors to do that. So are they short people there, do you know?
Yeah, so we did a call out last week for individuals, and thanks to Tabor Police, they're going to do a reduced level of clearance but ensure that the people who are delivering. And so there's 6 individuals who are going to be delivering meals from now until the end of May. We've calendared them, and but perhaps in June we'll continue to look for individuals. But for the next 6 weeks, it's been taken care of. But they did have to drop off before it was quite concerned they would have to stop that process.
How far does that service go, Tamara? Does that go out into the municipality, or is that strictly within town?
It is strictly within town, and not that I know is there any request. So the number of meals isn't as high as we may think, around a dozen, but that's quite a few people relative to our population. On that note, I did see Cypress County is offering a delivery service for people within our municipality. Now, we have a couple churches, and I know a couple of other taxi services. I just think it's something if one of our counselors in another area knew that we have people in isolation, and CPOs sound like they're doing some wellness checks. I'm not sure that's a program we want to implement, but I think we should be aware if we're missing something or somebody for food security in the municipality.
But it's nothing you're aware of, Tam. Everything seems to be okay as far as your knowledge.
Yes, everything is okay.
Okay, is there anything else in the consent agenda anybody would like to discuss? If not, we need a motion to accept the...
I see Arlos has a question.
Oh.
Just in reference to Councillor Mianega's comment about delivery of groceries and whatnot, that is something that we've been in communication with our FCSS group with, and they are or have developed a program such as that. So I can actually follow through with our Director of Emergency Management. That's who they've been in touch with, to see how that's accessible to perhaps people who are having difficulty accessing groceries and those types of essentials.
Arlos has our Hamlet foreman made aware of this.
Has our Hamlet foremans?
Correct, if they know of anybody within the hamlets.
Not that I'm aware, no. The Director of Emergency Management is actually just aware of this program recently, so I can follow up with him on how we can potentially make sure people are aware of it.
Okay.
Okay, anything else need to be discussed with the consent agenda? Any of those items? If not, we would entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda items.
So moved. Brian?
Okay, all in favor? Levitt?
In favor.
John?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Marie?
In favor.
Merrill's in favor, all carried. Okay, next we move on to 8.1, memos non-bylaw, payment for property tax, utility, and accounts receivable. So, Arlos or Brian Badura?
I can introduce it, Reeve Harris. Brian can probably speak to it with a little more specificity. But this is just simply a memo and information we wanted to provide to council with regard to payment deferrals for such things as utilities, and what's available currently within our existing framework. It's also there for discussion if council wanted to expand, or if they were happy with what is existing as it stands. Brian, can you add any, Brian Badura, are you able to add any more particular detail?
We've included the majority of the detail I believe it stems from the provincial government requesting that utility companies introduce a 90-day utility deferral, and we've included a sort of a little newsletter item from the provincial government, along with some of the other initiatives that they've introduced. And they did not include water utilities. They specifically included only natural gas and electricity utilities. However, other municipalities and water utility providers have introduced the same measures to not charge penalties, as well as allow a deferral period, extended period of time to pay the utilities. Currently, our bylaw doesn't apply utilities for late payments, as well as we don't turn off utilities for non-payment until after. In fact, utilities aren't turned off at all. The other collection methods kick in later on after 90 days already.
Do you expect many people taking advantage of this in our municipality on their water accounts, or Brian?
It's been early to say if people will take advantage of it. For March, the majority of the payments that we normally receive have come in, and we've introduced a new payment method. Talks about a little bit called option pay, which allows individuals to use a credit card to pay for anything, utilities, property taxes. However, it leaves them responsible to pay the service fees to the credit card company, whether it's 1% or 2%, is their responsibility. So far, it's too early to tell if we would see a lot of uptake. In the end, it's the message is consistent from everybody that the payment has to be made. It's a deferral and not
not forgiving it.
That's correct.
Okay. Anybody have any questions or anything for Brian or Ardos on that agenda item?
Just one point for clarification, Merrill. Are we not charging interest on our late accounts then?
I can answer that. So on the utility bylaw, there is no charge for late payment on utilities. As a matter of course, there is no penalty charge in accounts receivable either. The only penalty or late payment fees we have is with regards to property taxes, with our November 15th 5% penalty and January 1st 12% penalty.
Okay, and it's my understanding that the province is actually only asking for property taxes there into August, September. I think we're already well behind the date that most other municipalities collect their.
So far, the information we've received, that sounds correct. I'm not sure if it's October 1st is when they want the collection date to be moved to. Ours is already November 15th. We'll be finding out more tomorrow. There's a webinar for the property tax collections with regards to the province, so we'll be attending that.
Okay, any other comments or questions? So we just need a motion to accept for information then, if there's no more comments or questions. Anybody?
I'll give you that motion.
Okay, John gives a motion to accept the payment for property tax, utility, and accounts receivable memo for information. All in favor, Levitt?
In favor.
Brian?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Murray?
In favor.
Merrill in favor, carried. Okay, next agenda item, request for decision non-bylaw, C&V Excavating Limited approved contractor application. Carlos, or?
Yeah, so quite simply, I would defer to Craig Pittman. I believe he is on the Zoom meeting to provide comment in this regard. So if he can pipe in right after I'm done here.
Are you there, Craig?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep, now we got you.
Okay, we're in business. Good morning, Council. So CNV Excavating is seeking to become Tier 3 approved contractor status. I've worked with them. They've provided us all of the necessary information as per the policy, and we've been provided a recommendation to approve them for Tier 3 status.
Okay, so just for me, Craig, can you tell me what Tier 3 means? Is there, how many tiers have you got? I know you've probably done this for me once before, but just explain what a Tier 3 approval means.
Yeah, you bet. I'll start at Tier 1. Tier 1 is approaches, excavations, pipelines, and road buildings. Tier 2 is going to be approaches, excavation, and pipelines. So Tier 3, which this one is for approaches and excavation within the municipal right-of-way. Then you get into Tier 4, that's for boring, so doing directional drills, boring underneath roadways. And Tier 5 would be snow maintenance.
Okay. A company within that operates within the municipality, or somebody that's outside the municipality?
This is a company that's outside of the municipality looking to do work, primarily for home builders and other developers in the area.
Okay. Anybody have any comments, questions, concerns? Hearing none, we would entertain a motion one way or the other on this application.
I'll make a motion to accept.
Okay, give us a motion to approve CNV Excavating to be an approved contractor in the municipality. All in favor, Brian?
In favor.
John?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Marie?
In favor.
Merrill is in favor. Approved. Same thing with Milts Excavating Limited. Craig?
Yeah, so the other one is Milts Excavating Limited. Milts has done some work historically in the MD of Taber. One project in specific is the boat launch down at the Forks campground, which is done through a different process. So Milts is looking to do some pipeline crossings within the MD of Taber, and they've provided us all information. What they're seeking is Tier 1 approval, which includes road building. So they do have adequate equipment, knowledge, manpower to build roads as well. So recommendation on this to council is to approve Milts Excavating for Tier 1 approval.
Okay, any questions or anything on this application?
I'd be willing to make that motion.
Okay, Brian gives us a motion to approve Milts Excavating Limited to be an approved contractor in the municipality. All in favor? Levitt?
In favor.
John?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Marie?
In favor.
Merrill's in favor. Carried. Traffic control device change, and this is in north and west of Grassy Lake, I believe. Craig, are you going to talk to this one?
Yeah, certainly. I can speak to this one as well. We received a request from a local business in that area about the traffic control devices, how they would function much better in a different direction. So currently it is stopping traffic on the township road, in the east-west direction. And what the landowner had proposed is a change to control traffic in the north-south direction. Now, when we look at our road classification system, it is a Class 2 road running east-west and a Class 3 running north-south. So we are seeing more traffic as well as heavier traffic running east-west than we do north-south. Rewinding a little bit, what are the reasons for the traffic control in the first place? Historically, there's been some sightline issues there, some bins, some hay storage, and other things that were impeding the sightline. Those have now been cleaned up. And with the investigation that we did, the recommendation is to change traffic control with public notification from the east-west traveling public to the north-south traveling public.
Okay. Brian, this is your area. Comments, concerns?
I don't have any concerns. I think a few years back it was asked to be changed the other way, but that's fine.
Is this the majority of the traffic, Craig or Brian, going into the feedlot? Is that where the majority of the traffic is?
From the investigation that we did through administrative staff, yes, the majority of the traffic is utilizing that road for feedlot traffic or the local ag industry in that area.
Okay, any councillors have any questions or concerns on this proposed change to the flow of traffic? Okay, anybody prepared to make a motion one way or the other?
I can make the motion to approve.
Okay, Brian gives us a motion. All in favor? We'll start with Levitt again.
In favor.
John?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Marie?
In favor.
Merrill's in favor. It's carried. Hamlet cleanup. I'm guessing Jason's on the line.
Jason is on the line.
He's on the line now.
Go for it.
All right, just providing you this RFD with a few thoughts of what's going on around the countryside right now. So I have a number of concerns with our staff working with garbage that so this RFD points to that. So we brought it forward to you as a council to see what you thought about it.
Okay, anybody have any thoughts on that?
I have a question, Tamara. So I agree that, in safety for your staff, I just wondered, are you seeing an accumulation of stuff sitting outside of people's houses? They're talking about, trash increases, probably more of the heavier urban places because people are cleaning and sorting and there's nowhere to take it to. So I just wondered if there's any pressure on our hamlets that we're seeing that. And I know that's not quite in alignment with what you're talking about, but I just wondered if we're having that pressure.
Most of that's going to come landfill way in regards to where a lot of our stuff is going. I have visited with some of our landfill operators, and they haven't noticed increase. But to say that there's 7 extra garbage bags that came to the tipping station, yeah, that's tough to figure out. So are we hauling more weight? I can't answer that question either. So it is springtime, and there's getting to be a little bit more with your yard household cleaning or your yard cleanup. So hard to answer that question for our landfills.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question, Merrill.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jason, historically, this has been more a yard cleanup. In the past, I know it used to be garbage bags that had been accumulating in garages, but I think with the change of the bins there, that should no longer be an issue. It's really more about yard cleanup, is it not?
There's a lot of yard cleanup. There's some households, even though we ask them not to put household stuff in there, but anyways, it's a concern that our crew has, and so I brought it forward to you as council.
Anyone else have any comments or concerns on postponing Hamlet cleanup till sometime in the future?
I'd be willing to make them. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
I was going to say I'd be willing to make the motion as recommended by staff to postpone.
Okay, Jennifer's given us a motion to Hamlet cleanup be postponed into the future when employee safety can be better managed for this particular program. All in favor? And we'll start with Levity.
I just have one question.
You betcha.
I'll let Brian go.
Can we add till fall? Just put council of spring, and we'll do it again in the fall.
Yep, if you want to make that change.
You're okay with that, Jennifer?
Actually, I just want my motion to read as the recommendation because I feel that we are going to have to assess it when the time comes closer because we don't know where we're going to be at. So my motion would be as it reads in the recommendation.
And
go ahead, Tamara.
Yeah, and so not an implication on the motion, but I was wondering if our Hamlet users and our residents, if there will be any change or is there any restriction currently that if they wanted to manage their own yard cleanup, that they can take it to the dump or the compost sites that's relevant to their home, right? We're not counting bags of garbage anyways because they take it. So just wanted to make sure that if people wanted to get going on stuff, they still have that option and not leave it for our staff.
They do have that option. They throw it in their vehicle and take it to landfills anytime that the landfills are open. So
thank you.
Always there.
Any other comments or questions or concerns? Okay, Jennifer's given us a motion, the recommended motion from staff, from administration. All in favor, Levitt?
In favor.
Brian?
In favor.
John?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Murray?
In favor.
Merrill's in favor, so that's carried. Next on the agenda is a Hayes campground shelter. Carlos, are you taking this or Jason?
This was an item brought forward to Jason, and I can have him field any questions from what was presented in the RFD.
All right, this was mailed into the office and it got forwarded to me. So I met with the fellow that's heading it up last week and actually got more information and stuff like that. So this is what they're proposing as a group. They're proposing to provide the labor to build this building if the MD provided materials. And anyways, they have lots. This is I guess somewhat in its infancy. I haven't talked with the counselor out there yet, nor with the rec board out there yet, but I knew that this kind of dollar figure needs to get budgeted if it even gets past council. So that's why it's sitting in front of you as a group, as a council. You can visit about it and see if it's deemed worthy enough to be forwarded onto a future budgeting time. But I did get over the weekend, Brian Badura was looking at our agenda here and he saw that and he says, we might be able to get some grant money for something like that. So anyways, it would be anywhere from 5 to 40% of the cost covered according to the grant funding that I'm looking at this morning. So.
Okay, local councillor, thoughts on that, or anybody else have any thoughts on that? Or just the recommendation to discuss it on 2021 budget process in the fall?
Well, I would say moving forward, I think it would be okay to consider and maybe possibly look at grants, but I'd also like to see more collaboration with the group and the rec board and the camp. I would like to see it come forward as a group request, not just a group, like a one group or one off. I'd like to see that everybody's kind of involved in the planning process if it was to move forward, or at least a request from the campground people, because that's where it would be located.
Okay, anybody else have any comments or?
I guess my only comment would be the ongoing operational costs of it, and where that would come from, if that would be an ongoing expense, or if they were willing to look after the ongoing costs associated with it.
Oh, go ahead, Arlos is gonna.
I guess from administration's perspective, and kind of to reiterate Jason's initial comments, this is really in its infant stages, and those would definitely be questions asked, and that's part of the reason why we're suggesting maybe it be deferred to a more detailed 2021 budget discussion process, and we might have some of those questions answered a little bit more finitely, as well as have had an opportunity to talk to the other stakeholders in that area, kind of in line with Councillor Croson's thoughts.
Okay. Jason, I'm just going to put you on the spot. The one that they built there in the Barnwell Park there, any idea what that one cost?
Yeah, I don't have a clue. I know the concrete was already there from their previous, I think it was a skateboard park that they moved out of the way, put that roof over, but that's similar to what they're looking at there for Hayes. I could find out costs, but they've already priced out building here, but yeah, I could find out what Barnwell's cost.
Okay, like I said, I don't even know what size it actually is in comparison to what they're asking for here, but I know Barnwell, I think it was just last year, wasn't it? Jason built one there in their park?
Yes, correct, and the community helped raise it also, so.
Right. Okay, somebody want to make a motion that we consider this in the 2021 budget after all the groups in Hayes, rec board or whatever gets together and comes with a formal proposal? Is that what we're looking for?
I would be okay with making the motion as the recommended option, as council would consider the request during the 2021 budget deliberation process. Unless somebody else had any other questions.
Okay, not hearing any. Jennifer's made a motion that council consider this request during the 2021 budget deliberation process. All in favor? Levitt?
In favor.
Brian?
In favor.
John?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Murray?
In favor.
Merrill's in favor, so that's carried. Next on the agenda is Eagle Spirit Nest Community Association. Carlos, do you want to speak to that one?
Yep. Yes, Reeve Harris. Quite simply, it's a request for donation with regard to their event that's scheduled for June 21st, 2020. As far as whether or not it will indeed take place, we are unsure. We're not. We have yet to be able to confirm with them on that end. We're just taking the correspondence as it is presented to you folks. So they're just simply looking for a donation.
Brian Badura, was this one added to our list of regular grants, or is this still just a one year by year sort of a thing?
During the budget process, we did earmark it to discuss for recreation grants to be included there. However, I don't think it was included as a regular recreation grant, but we do maintain grants, other grants, which gives council the ability to do ad hoc grants for various purposes. That's where they were granted through that budget in the past.
And this seems like about, the third year that we've done this or been asked to do this? Does that sound about right?
I believe it's been about, this would be the third year that they requested grant funding.
Anybody want to speak for or against or comments on this ask?
I believe that we actually did have it on a list, because I think I remember seeing somewhere that we had put it in our grant list from before. I had actually mentioned to them to send in a letter for an official request. So I think we had the discussion at some point on, as a small step in truth and reconciliation, that would be our way of supporting that in the community. And we should have been having a meeting this week, but I haven't heard anything from the association this week. So once we do, I can always update council on what will be happening. But my assumption would be that it's probably going to not happen, but I could be wrong in saying that.
Okay. Anybody want to make a motion one way or the other on this ask? Like I said, I think we've done it in the past, and I don't remember, Brian Badura, how much have we given in the past, or Jennifer, do you remember, or anybody?
I believe it's been $1,000 each year. I don't know if last year was a little bit more or not, but I know that it's been around that threshold.
Okay, anybody prepared to make a motion one way or the other?
Jen, did you want to, because it's your committee?
I'm okay with either way.
Okay.
I do know that
go ahead.
if we were to contribute to them this year and they don't have an event, it's not like it's going to be spent on anything other than an event moving forward.
Yeah, I think I will put, if I make the motion, I will put in there that it is dependent on the event proceeding, if people are okay with that. So I would take the recommendation of for an $1,000 donation, and the grant will be delivered upon confirmation the June 21st event is proceeding.
Okay, anybody have any discussion on that before we vote? Okay, so Tamara's given, Tamara's given us a motion to provide a $1,000 donation for the event on June 21st, 2020, and contingent on the event actually happening, something to that effect, right? Candace will read the motion really quick.
That council provide a donation to the Eagle Spirit Nest Community Association for National Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st, 2020 in the amount of $1,000, and that the donation will be provided upon confirmation that the event is proceeding.
Okay, Tamara's given us the motion, so all in favor, Levitt?
In favor.
Brian?
In favor.
John?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Marie?
In favor.
Merrill's in favor, so carried. Letter from the Tabor Golf Course.
So again, from an introductory perspective, I believe this was previously discussed, or an iteration of it was previously discussed at the 2020 budget discussions with council. I don't believe at that point in time a final decision had been made, but they have submitted again a formal request with regard to a contribution to the Tabor Golf Course.
Okay, so I believe the letter that was sent back in September was asking the MD for $50,000. Does that sound right to anybody? And I think that's kind of in the letter here that's in front of us again. I'd asked Brian Badura yesterday if the golf course had ever provided their financial statements, and I don't remember, Brian, if they have or if they haven't.
I don't recall seeing their financial statements for last year. They could have been submitted and just hadn't been forwarded to me so far yet.
Okay, so around the table, anybody have any thoughts or comments, questions, opinions on what to do with this request?
I guess I have a comment in regards to it. I think if we were to go ahead, I think it would be in a grant similar to what we're doing with the Enchanter Vauxhall. But at the same time, I know we're going to be reviewing all our grants, so I would hate to be committing long-term if we were going to be switching how we're doing our grant process for recreation.
Brian Badura, can you remind me what we have on our grant list for Enchant or Vauxhall, what we have given historically?
So we're just in the process of looking at giving out our grants or creating checks to pay out the grant, the recreation grants to the organizations who submitted financial statements. For the two golf clubs, it originally started at approximately about $1,500, and I believe 2 years ago it was increased to $3,000 a year for each of them.
And those have appeared to be annual contributions, correct?
Yes, that's annually.
Anybody else around the table have any thoughts or comments? Carlos? Go ahead.
So one thing that we have kind of discussed too is that we may have some groups that may or may not need the funds at different times. So I know this year's grant list, if we're preparing it and they're going to be going out, and yes, we have approved it already for 2020, but I'm wondering if we can reach out and be sure that some of these groups do actually need the funds, and if they don't, maybe some of that funds could be redirected towards the Tabor Golf Course. Or if we were to do something, I wouldn't want it to exceed what we're already giving other golf courses.
I just, if I can add to that, a lot of our recreation grant funding, especially to our hamlets, is geared towards ensuring they have the funds to pay their utility bills as well as their insurance. even with the current environment out there, those costs will likely need to be paid in 2020, and they may be in the situation where they do see less revenues in order to pay some of their other costs as well. So to check with them to see if they need the monies we give them, like I said, is more geared towards utilities and insurance.
What about some of the other groups that we're giving money to, though, besides just the rec boards?
And yes, a lot of those groups that we do give funds to, they do have facilities as well that require insurance, and facilities that require insurance and utilities. But we definitely can send letters out or ask them their operating situation, if they'll be requiring those funds, or if they've decided to not operate for the season.
Another question for Brian Badura. How are we doing financially? Like, what do you really see happening this year? Do we have excess funds somewhere that we could make a donation, or are we really looking at some serious trouble in front of us?
To answer that in general, it's really early to be able to give you an accurate assessment of where we would be for the end of the year, besides reflecting on our budget. As far as our assessments, we figured we would be losing much more assessment than we actually have come to realize. Our live assessment is a little better than we estimated, and we'll be bringing that forward soon. The only other item which we don't know for sure is where tax collections will be at the end of the year. I know with the deferrals for property taxes, especially with oil companies, we have seen about half a dozen oil companies more or less send letters or give notice that they're having difficult times. They want to discuss their property taxes with us. We may not know that situation until November 15th.
Okay, as it's been noted, we've been helping the Vauxhall and the Enchant golf course for a number of years. The Tabor one hasn't asked up until this past fall for any help, and their letter is graciously asking for some help, either an annual grant similar to Vauxhall or a one-time grant. Anybody have any desire to help out, or any anybody prepared to make a motion one way or the other to help them out?
I have a question, I guess, for Brian Badura. Just wondering, so you said that we're paying Vauxhall and Enchant. Is it $3,000 a year?
Yes, they each get a $3,000 a year recreation grant annually.
And it's my understanding those are both 9-hole courses, is that right?
Yes, they are 9-hole courses.
Thank you.
I would like us, this is Tamara, I would like us to give some consideration to this. It's a one-time ask, and looking for a specialized mower. I know at this time of budgeting and concern for what's coming down the pipe, but I think, and it speaks to again why we need to get back to getting our granting figured out. After we saw the financial statements for 2019, you know, I do feel that we have some area to support some of these groups who are also in turn promoting fitness, but also supporting other community groups, not just in Tabor, but beyond that as well, industry related. Yeah, so I'm not I don't know the dollar amount that's right. Should it be 6,000 a year, and should it be a one time for this year, or, you know, they were asking for 50,000. I don't know that we have that kind of dollar amount, but I would like to know other people's thoughts too.
Anybody else have any thoughts on how you might want to help them?
Do they?
Brian, go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to ask, do they have they went to the Tabor Recreation Tabor Rec Board too, or is that avenue been exhausted already?
I believe the town granted them 50. Arnos is not in. The town did give them $50,000 to help them out. Brian, you were going to say something, Brian Bruin?
Yeah. Were they wanting to borrow money for this, or was this an outright payment? So what I'm thinking, if we were to give them a 3 or a 6 similar to the others, would that be enough to make their payment? Can anyone answer that?
Yeah, I don't have.
I can. The information I can provide is what's included in that letter, and they're either looking for a one-time contribution or those annual amounts. And you would figure that an annual amount, I think, in the context of an 18-hole golf course, which they insinuate, would be sufficient from a payment perspective. I don't want to make that blind assumption, but looking at the amounts here, it probably would be sufficient.
I guess one other question we need to have as well is, will we include it in our 2020 grant, or will we be adding it to 2021?
I would like us to look at it in our 2020 grant. They came to us in September. We had made it, as a council, talked about that we were going to review our granting system prior to now, and we just haven't got there. So, for lots of different reasons. And so I would like to see us include them in our 2020 grant.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I have one other question. I know that there's some grants that we've committed to on an annual basis, and I think some of them may be expiring soon. Do we know of any of those that maybe, like, our commitment to them may be fulfilled sooner than later, Brian Badura, or do you know? And an example would be the gymnastics club. Is that something that we're tied to for an extended period of time?
That one in particular, I believe, is the only one that we've earmarked to review in 2020 to see if we're going to continue on with that grant funding. The rest of them, there was no stipulations whether to be reviewed or not.
Okay. Anybody want to make a motion one way or the other?
So would it be in line to have it more than the 3,000 since it's a larger golf course?
Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I guess my thoughts on it, I know it makes, like, I can understand that, but then I feel that increasing that, and then the others will then also be asking for an increase too, because I think a lot of these ones, smaller ones, are struggling to make a go of it, because I know when Vauxhall came to us for that increase a couple of years ago, I think they were asking for 6,000 then from the MD. But I know, like, I would be probably okay with like a 3,000 for this year, and then when we get to review our recreation grant funding and get to see financials, throughout our recreation that is going on with the MD, I think we'll have a better understanding of the groups that truly do need it and some other ones that might have lots of funds and they don't really need the money. That it does them good, but there's probably other groups out there in the MD that could probably use that funding, would have a better use for that funding.
So the other thought too would be, do we look at not being an ongoing grant and just doing a one-time capital purchase and see whether that would be, and not the full amount, but instead of spreading it over, then it's one time and it's done, and it's, that would be something that we could also consider.
From an administrative perspective, if you're looking at, and I do think this can be somewhat answered independently of an overall recreation grant strategy, just given our current circumstance, but I wouldn't, from an administrative perspective, you would not necessarily want to see a list of annual contributions growing year after year, just given the current context of trying to mitigate annual spending year over year. Depending on your perspective, one could look at a one-time contribution as favorable in terms of not putting another permanent or semi-permanent grant recipient on the list moving forward.
Okay. Anybody else want to give their opinion? Murray, John? Any comments or questions?
This is John here. I'd be in favor of giving them a yearly grant for however long it takes to pay this mower off. The town has given them similar grant funding. As far as the other golf courses, should we give them $6,000 because they have 18 holes? That's a pretty easy argument to make with the other courses. I don't think that would be unfair or unreasonable to give them $6,000 for the next 8 years or so to pay for this, or maybe fund the more right up front if we have available funds. But I don't know that we do, so it might be best to do a 8-year funding.
Well, sorry, was that a motion or are we still discussing?
Still discussing, I think.
Okay. Is that so? I guess that's the one thing I would like to check with administration based on what Arlos has said. If we did a lump sum contribution on the capital, which is what they initially came to us for, then we know what we've spent, it's off our books and it's done. And so what if we were to pay for half of the mower?
A one-time contribution of $25,000, is that what you're thinking there, Tanner? You're on mute.
I'm trying to shut my mom off here. Yes, $25,000.
A one-time capital contribution, and it'd be half of what they're asking for. Budget-wise, can it be squeezed in, Arlos, Brian, or is that too much?
Brian can probably explain the process if we were to pull it from reserves, or if that was the chosen funded method.
Yes, we can do either one. If you did approve a grant, we are coming up to final budget discussions. We could bring it forward to the final budget just to include in the budget, or at this time make a motion to draw it from an operating reserve at this particular time. Either one would work. As far as the monies for it, we went through the financial statement. As Derek Taylor said, the MD is in fairly good financial position right now. So it's at council discretion to authorize a grant.
Yeah, I myself, this is Murray here. I'd be more in favor of giving a one-time grant than putting them in the normal recreation funding. But I'm not so sure about the 25,000. But if we do that, I don't know. Some of the other couple of courses might want us to start funding some of their mowers too. So I don't know. It's kind of a slippery slope.
I agree with Murray that it could be a slippery slope, but I'm recognizing that they haven't come to us for any grants, and we have helped out some of the other courses in different ways, and I hope we will still be able to with gravel and things like that. I don't know if, from the way their letter writes, I don't know that we've given those kinds of things to Tabor, but I can't speak to that. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say I would like to make a motion to donate $25,000 towards the purchase of the mower for Tabor Golf Course, a one-time funding.
Excuse me. Okay, so Tamara's given us a motion for one-time grant funding, or one-time funding of help for the Tabor Golf Course of the amount of $25,000. All those in favor, and we'll start with Levitt again.
Yeah, I'll be in favor.
Okay, Brian?
In favor.
John?
In favor.
Jennifer?
Not in favor.
Marie?
Not in favor.
Okay, Merrill would be in favor, so that one's carried. Next is the Tabor Trail Run Organizer Tough Run. And Arlos, can you speak to this one?
Yep, just quite simply, they're looking for I guess permission to use part of the park and to waive, I believe, part of the rental fee for one of the day use areas, and I believe they're looking at a July date here, or July 11th.
Yep.
So the only one thing that I might suggest, if council was interested in satisfying this request, you might suggest, given that from an optimistic perspective, I sure hope the park is open. But if it's closed, you may the approval could be, or the satisfaction of the request could be conditional upon status of MD Park.
Okay, anybody have any thoughts on the request that's been put forward to waive some of the fees and allow them to use one of the group use areas on July the 11th for their Tough Run?
Just for clarification, Merrill, are they asking to use some of the trails within the park or just the campground facility?
I believe it's both. So they would be crossing the road, accessing the campground.
Could we split this into two motions then, and I'd be willing to make the motion to allow them to use the MD Park as part of their run, as long as it's open, and then maybe another motion for the dollar amount.
Okay, we can certainly do that. So you're giving a motion to let them use the park?
Let them use the trails if it is, as long as it's open.
All right, as long as the park is open by then. Okay, Brian's has given us a motion to allow the Tough Run Tabor Trail Run organizers to use the MD Park trails for part of their day run. All those in favor, and we'll start again with Levitt. Levitt's not answering. Brian gave us a motion. John?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
There he is. Okay. Tamara?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Murray?
In favor.
Merrill is in favor, so it's carried. The second motion that we need is to waive the fees. Is that correct? What we need? Waive the fees for the day?
Looking for a waiver of the fee on the group site.
Right.
They've booked.
Which amounts to how much, Candace?
400. Do they have it booked for the whole weekend? It'd be 480.
480. Okay, we would need a motion to approve the waiver, if anybody wants to do that. Or more discussion?
I'll give that motion.
Okay, John gives us a motion to waive the fees on the group use area for the Tabor Trail Run organizers. All those in favor?
I just have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just have one question. So is that where, and I haven't been to the event, so I'm just curious, is that where they set up the event? That's the start and the finish and that type of thing?
Last year they hadn't, but I would imagine that's where they want to move it to. Last year it was just kind of in the group use, or kind of by the camp kitchen there. But I would assume that they want to move it into one of the group use areas to give them a little more, I guess, autonomy.
Jason here, Council. Last year I worked with Jeff Hamilton, who is running it again this year. And they ran it out of the day use area last year because they were too late to get a group site area. And so I told them they needed to book right now. And that was last year when they had their run. And so anyways, they booked their group use area. So everything will be run out of there, so they won't interfere with the majority of the park now. So everything will come and start and end at the group use area that they have booked. So everything goes under the bridge, from what I understand, unless they change their trail network around this year, which they might. But yeah, everything went west into the trails there. So,
Jason, more information. Do they pay to take this run? Is it a free run, or how is that managed?
I'm guessing that there's probably a small sign-up fee, but to answer that question, I would have to check into it and see. So it does say there on the last paragraph, any excess funds will be reinvested into the race and donated to local groups. So whether it's a $10 or $20 sign-up fee, I don't know.
I'll be honest, John, and I know this isn't your motion, but my thoughts were to split it, 50% decrease on it. Just reluctant to waive fees because a lot of the people that rent them sites are volunteer groups. Might be setting a precedent.
I think the difference here, they brought a lot of people into the community last year when they had it, and I think this is something that will continue to grow. And should there, I would be opposed to a 50%, but I don't know that they're, without their financials, and maybe that's something we need to ask for. I don't know if we can make that determination because maybe they don't have the money. I'm not sure.
Excuse me, anybody else have any comments or concerns, questions?
I think it's a good promotional event to get people to Tabor and surrounding area. So I think waiving the fee for that isn't a cost concern on my end.
Okay. Any others? John, you've given us a motion, or you want to change it, or you're still good with the motion you made?
I'm good with the motion I made.
Okay, so John's given us a motion to waive the fees for the Tabor Trail Run organizers. We'll go the same way. All in favor, Levitt?
In favor.
Brian?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Murray?
In favor.
Merrill's in favor, so that's carried. 9.9 Highway 3 letter. Believe I sent everybody a letter that I received yesterday from the Highway 3 Twinning Association. That I understand the government has put $2 billion out there for shovel-ready stimulus projects to help the economy get going once this pandemic is over. Tamara, did you have something you wanted to bring up with that, other than perhaps sending a letter recommending or endorsing Highway 3's proposal to get working on the highway?
No, I just thought that since we had a meeting, we should continue our support for that.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Would we want to endorse with a separate letter Highway 3 Twinning Association's recommendation to, they're talking about stage 1 and stage 2 over the next couple of years to get the project moving and off the ground. Is that something you would like to endorse?
I think it's something we should put in our shovel-ready projects. Merrill might be the best place to do that.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Only other comment I have, Merrill, is there also have a petition or something going? Is it something we could put on our website to promote?
Is that petition from Highway 3 Association, or is it from a group in Bow Island?
I'm not sure. To my knowledge, it was a Highway 3, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure either. I did see that a petition, I thought it was from a group out of Bow Island, but I could be wrong.
I believe it is a group out of Bow Island because their family was impacted by a collision. So, I think Highway 3, I saw different groups involved in it, but it wasn't their petition. That's not the name on the top.
Right, that's what I remember. But I certainly think that it's worth pushing, because if there's money out there to get this project started, I would certainly be willing to endorse Highway 3's recommendation on the 2-year timeline to get this project started. Anybody else have? Go ahead.
I'm gonna change what I just said. So there's been 2 petitions for sure, because I know the one wasn't. But if you go down on that email, Arlo, you'll see where it says official petition, and if you click on it, it'll show you the website that says sign the official petition.
Okay, yeah,
sign the petition. Just bear with me, I'm trying to pull it up here.
A little farther down, I think.
Is that, can you folks see that?
Sign the petition right there.
Would it, this is John here, would it be more impactful to have each municipality that would like to see this on the shovel-ready project sending letters in individually? Or would it be better to have that, I guess, letter come from the Highway 3 committee with all the communities signing on to it? Which would be the best, I guess? That's my question.
Your thoughts on that, Arlos?
I think it would be, I think either or would be impactful, but it would be quite impactful if you saw, in my opinion, again, this would be my opinion, if you saw a letter suggesting this as a shovel-ready project with all those municipalities signing that letter, I think that would show a significant level of support. But again, I will qualify that as my opinion, but either way, if council wants a link to a petition on our website, if they do want to see that, administration would likely need a motion to that effect.
Okay, I can certainly get a hold of Bill Chapman, who is the chair of Highway 3 Twinning Association, and see how they would like us to proceed. But if we would like to put this petition link on there, is everybody in favor of doing that? Adding the petition link to our website?
I guess just with clarification where it's coming from, Merrill, if it's coming from the Highway 3, I would be okay with it. And if it's a private one, I would have some concern.
Yeah, like I said, on this one that I got yesterday, there is a signed petition there. It's on the screen now from the Twinning Association. So that petition I would be comfortable putting on the website. The other one that, like I said, it was a group out of Bow Island. That one was more of a private petition. I wouldn't be in favor of putting that one on our website. But the official one from the Twinning Association, like I said, I could, if we wanted to make a motion to do it, if we have, I could contact the association and just make sure that that's okay with them, or if that's something that they would like us to do.
And I'd be willing to make that motion as long as it's coming out of the Highway 3.
Okay. So Brian's give us a motion to add to our website that sign the petition from the Highway 3 Twinning Association onto our website. All those in favor, and we'll do the same routine. Levitt?
In favor.
Brian gives motion. John?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Murray?
In favor.
And Merrill is in favor. So I will contact either Bill Chapman or Victoria Chester just to make sure that that's what they would like us to do. But I said I just think that that's, if the government's looking for projects, this is one that I think our municipality would hardly endorse. Any further?
Merrill, I'd be prepared to make a second motion on this.
Okay.
That we draft a letter supporting this, whether it be through the Highway 3 Association or individually, whichever one would be best, and make sure that it's sent to our MLA so he can be pursuing it as well. Actually, both MLAs.
Yeah, both MLAs, yep. Okay, so Brian's give us a motion to draft a letter of support for the Highway 3 Twinning project. Is that what your motion would like to be, John? Brian?
Correct. Being either if the Highway 3 is doing a joint one, or if we do it individually.
Okay. And again, I can talk to those, Victoria or Bill, and just see which way they'd like us to do it, whether it's individually or as all the municipalities involved. So Brian's given us another motion. All in favor? Levitt?
In favor.
John?
In favor.
Tamara?
In favor.
Jennifer?
In favor.
Murray?
In favor.
Merrill's in favor. Carried. Okay, any further discussion on the highway, or on the Highway 3 letter? All right. According to my agenda, we've come down to the closed session. Is that, no, she gave me the nod. So we just need a few minutes to get the streaming turned off, and then we'll go into closed session. If everyone wants to take 5 minutes.
Could we maybe take 10?
We could, if that's what you'd like.
Is that okay? I just, I need to get some lunch ready for some people.
All
or
right.
maybe myself.
It is 11:54, so